I'm going to be discussing a theatrical tradition known as the Comedy of Manners. Following his victory in the English Civil War in 1651, Oliver Cromwell, a devout Puritan, took a strong line against theatre and shut down many public performance spaces. Following a brief and failed reign by his son, Charles II returned from exile on the 29th of May, 1660, and his emergence led to a rejuvenation of the arts. Many started relatively afresh, devoid of influence from their Elizabethan predecessors. The plays of this period fit largely into a genre known as the comedy of manners. Not exclusive to this period, the comedy of manners often satirises the behaviour of a particular social class, usually the nobility. In this period, the nobility were once again able to live a very elaborate lifestyle. Charles II himself became notorious for his wild and lascivious activities. In the Politics and Plays of Bernard Shaw, Judith Evans writes that Charles II, with his elaborate wigs, his many mistresses, and his numerous bastard sons, fits ideally in his period, and is the comedy of his times. This sexual liberation laid at the heart of many comedy of manners. It's also worth noting that comedy of manners were almost entirely reserved for the richest and most powerful people. In essence, the wealthy paid to watch themselves and their peers be mocked on stage. As David Else and Oliver Berry write in England, bawdy Restoration comedies satirised the upper classes and indulged in fabulously used jokes. And these jokes would have been easily understandable to a comedy of manners audience because they were about them. Also very interesting is the fact that the comedy of manners often wasn't the centre of attention for people who went to the theatre. Many were too busy speaking to their peers, eating, or soliciting sexual favours from prostitutes to actually pay plays their full attention. And as a result, accessibility became a hugely important part of the playwright's job. As Susan J. Owens writes in Perspectives on Restoration Drama, the candles remain lit throughout the performance, permitting flirting, the sale of everything from oranges to sexual favours, and sometimes fights. Now, this necessity of accessibility affected various parts of the comedy of manners. Often the plots were quite formulaic, dealing with an upper-class scandal, whereas characters were often caricatures who had names which explained their primary traits. For instance, in The Country Wife, a very famous comedy of manners, you have a character called Pinchwife, whose single role is to pinch the wives of other characters. This need for accessibility also affected other elements of the comedy of manners. Jokes were very often innuendos or double entendres. This kind of wordplay was easily accessible. Even if you had been paying attention to the entirety of the plot, you could easily understand what the joke was about, and it was easy to grasp what was meant to be funny, even if you didn't entirely know who these characters were. In Restoration Comedy and Performance, J.L. Stein writes that the innuendo is such that it's often uncertain whether the character or the actor is speaking, and then it becomes vastly more interesting. Often characters would deliver asides to the audience, and in those they would deliver their innuendos and jokes, and this is what J.L. Stein is talking about in this rotation. And as J.L. Lawalia notes in the comedy of the 18th century, the immorality of Restoration comedy. It's rape heroes and gay heroines, adulterous couples, lewd situations, and smutty, lascivious dialogue. These were plays which weren't afraid to deal with what might have been considered sexually immoral, and this is a huge part of what makes them so different from the plays that surround them. Now, for my physical exploration and demonstration, I'm going to be looking at the physicality of a comedy of manners aside. An aside is, of course, where you deliver lines of dialogue directly to the audience, often apart from a normal conversation, and they were used very effectively in comedy of manners to deliver jokes and innuendos to the audience. Now, the physicality is a hugely special part, and demands that I looked at and developed my own physicality. At first, I wasn't entirely sure what I'd actually need to do. I just did an aside with pretty basic physicality. If I was perhaps sad, I would be like this. And if I was perhaps trying to be a gallant rake or something, I'd be like this. Now, both those poses would perhaps work in a normal theatre environment, but the comedy of manners is far more hyperbolic and far more exaggerated than that. As we can see here, often characters would have certain poses for each emotion. Actors were expected to know what pose they would pull for each moment in the play, for each emotion they wanted to express. In addition, upon arrival, they would often pull poses to announce to the audience that they had arrived and to signal that a new block of action might be about to begin. As a result, I watched some contemporary comedy of manners performers and read some biographies of old practitioners and learnt what it was that they did to prepare their poses. As a result, my sad pose went from this to being something more like this. Now, as you can see, it's worlds apart. There is huge amounts of muscular tension in this pose. My fingers are splayed, my arms are strong. In addition, my feet are rooted to the ground, and this gives it a certain amount of impact, a certain amount of presence on screen, on stage even, and it's hugely important that this presence is there. These poses have to be powerful. They have to be able to be seen from an audience who perhaps isn't watching, and they need to be clear. The audience needs to be able to understand what it is that this pose represents, so that if they're just jumping back into the play after eating an orange or having a fray with a prostitute, they can understand what it is that's going on. In addition, my entire body is quite open. This means that anyone from any part of the audience can see what I'm doing and what I'm trying to convey. I did a similar thing for my gallant pose. It went from being something like this, being more like this. And as you can see, it's far bigger. There's far more muscular tension in my arms. My fingers are far stronger. This arm has a stronger arc. My feet are rooted to the ground, giving it presence on stage, and I'm looking upwards with a raised chin. Good posture is also an important thing in Comedy of Manners, because whilst they may be dealing with the sexually immoral, these are the upper classes, and they do have pretty good posture. It's also really interesting to look at movement in the Comedy of Manners. A huge part of delivering on the side is walking down to the apron of the stage and delivering it directly to the audience. Now, at first I moved like I would normally. I would walk down to the apron. I soon realised this would break the stylisation of the piece. It would ruin the entire feel of what's going on. I looked then at archetypes of different kinds of Comedy of Manners characters, learned what they were like, and tried to apply that to my movement. I looked at the rake, who is often the hero of a Comedy of Manners. Now, the rake is a sexually liberated male, quite flirty, often a bit arrogant, and they lay at the heart of many Comedy of Manners plays. I also learned about the lech, who is often an older man who makes unwanted advances on usually younger women. I then applied these archetypes to my movements and tried to develop movements which would be in fitting with the rest of the Comedy of Manners. For my rake, I ended up with something like this. Now, as you can see, it's got swaggering shoulders, it's got a strong posture. I'm walking with the heels of my feet before the balls and stepping confidently. In addition, I have my chin raised, and I have wide shoulders, well, as wide as mine can be, to show that this is an arrogant character, one with a certain degree of confidence. And all of this fits together to create a kind of movement which is specific to his archetype. For the lech, I created something slightly different. I decided to try and bend my knees and step with the balls of my feet before the heels, whilst also rubbing my legs. As you can see, it's a very different kind of character, and it's important that the movement conveys exactly who this character is, so that an audience watching it can instantly understand that's that character's traits, that's how he fits into this play, that's his role. It is worth noting, however, that some scholars think that it's bad to put in too much exaggeration, that the dialogue should be at the heart of the Comedy of Manners, but it's worth striking a balance between having these very clear and easy to understand archetypal movements and poses, and having a focus on the dialogue that makes up the Comedy of Manners. For my demonstration, I'm going to be looking at Abdelaziz or the Moor's Revenge, a 1676 play by Aphra Behn, one of the first female playwrights in England. I'm going to try and apply what I've learned about the Comedy of Manners aside and the Comedy of Manners physicality to a short extract and to embody what this period is all about. Gallants, you have so long been absent hence that you have almost cooled your diligence. For while we study or revive a play, you, like good husbands, in the country lay. Now, even from the very beginning, I was introducing elements of the Comedy of Manners physicality. Upon entry, I made a huge pose to announce my arrival, to show everyone that I'm on stage. Anyone who perhaps has been distracted by other goings-on in the theatre will then know that something new is about to start and that a new character has arrived. I then walked down to the apron, or as far as I could go, with a physicality which resembled that of a rake. I tried to apply an archetype so that this would have some kind of character, and so the audience could see who I was. I walked with swaying shoulders, I walked with the heels of my feet before the balls, and I walked with a raised chin. All of this creating as large a presence as possible, and letting people know what character I am. Once I reached the apron, I tried to make as many large open gestures as possible, to try and draw in the audience and make them aware that I was speaking to them. I was trying to create a relationship with them. And this relationship is hugely important if you're delivering jokes or dialogue to the audience. Now, this piece is a mockery of the audience for their failure to attend the theatre more regularly, and I tried to imbue Behn's text with some of the poses which would represent what this character was feeling. For instance, at the beginning of the extract, I had a kind of mocking, condescending lean toward the audience, my arms open, the entire posture of my character representing that this is someone who's condescending, jokingly perhaps, but condescending nonetheless to the audience who are watching them. And by having my chin raised, I was speaking to the entire audience, letting everyone know that I was addressing them. I also reused one of the poses I looked at in my physical exploration, the woe is me pose. And this pose is used to show a sort of mocking sadness, to show that, oh, I'm so put upon. It's clear what the character is trying to do. It is clear what I'm trying to represent. And an audience member just looking in will understand what is going on stage in this extract. I feel like I've used lots of the different elements of the Comedy of Manners physicality, from poses to announcing arrivals with large gestures. But I have ignored some parts of the Comedy of Manners which perhaps would have increased the capability of this piece. If I perhaps included some sexual humour and jokes which are very integral to the Comedy of Manners, then perhaps this physicality would have been very different. Also, I feel like perhaps I should have enforced my physicality more rigidly. Perhaps if I looked at how being the rake would have affected a pose or my gestures, it would have been a very different piece. Nonetheless, I feel like my demonstration overall looked at many elements of the Comedy of Manners physicality. I've learned a lot from doing this demonstration of physical exploration. Beforehand, I was more reliant upon my voice and upon my facial expressions to express how my character was feeling. But having done this, I've seen how important it can be to use your physicality as a tool. The audience can glean from you instantly what your character is feeling, and you don't have to say a line of dialogue or make a single facial expression. And this is hugely powerful, whether you're at the front of the stage or if you're in the background. I've tried to apply this more to other pieces of acting, and to build up my confidence with my physicality, so that I can be as capable as possible. I've also begun to see links between the Comedy of Manners physicality and the movement of Comedy of Manners and the works of Steven Berkoff. A 20th and 21st century playwright and theatre practitioner, his works are renowned for using high degrees of muscular tension, lots of poses, and many movements in their pieces. I saw how works by Berkoff often use poses to show how a character is feeling or to accentuate a point. And by doing this Comedy of Manners work, I've seen that a pose can convey huge amounts of information. It can be impactful, and it can be really strong. I've developed my own confidence in holding poses and in creating poses which can convey all the information you need simply through my physicality. It's also worth noting that Berkoff uses lots of movement in his pieces, and whilst it's very different from the Comedy of Manners, the same basic principles apply. Showing what your character is feeling, showing who they are just through their movements, is as integral to Comedy of Manners as it is to Berkoff. And looking at how Comedy of Manners uses archetypes and how Berkoff uses archetypes, it's interesting to see how these two practices can be related to one another. In addition, Berkoff very frequently uses asides or direct addresses of the audience. It's very important to see how you can build that relationship, either from coming down to the apron, or from having direct addresses, or making gestures, or having physicality which is as open as possible. All in all, I have developed large amounts of confidence through doing this demonstration. I've seen how my physicality can affect a play, and I've seen how it can relate to other theatre practices. Thank you.